Have you ever stopped to wonder, what if everything they call love is nothing more than fear of being alone? What if the need to have someone is simply a disguise to avoid facing the emptiness within yourself? And what if what you call a relationship is just another way to run away from you? Nothing is closer to the truth than the discomfort we feel in solitude. Carl Jung once urged us to imagine being on our deathbed, the room dark, the sounds muffled by a consciousness slowly detaching from the body. And then in that final silence, a question whispers, did you live your own life, or did you merely accompany someone else's? At some point, all of us are seduced by that pre-written script. Find someone, love, share a life, grow old together. It sounds beautiful, it sounds safe, but no one tells us what is lost in that process. No one speaks of the parts of ourselves that die in the name of harmony, of the dreams stored away, of the desires silenced, of the soul bending slowly until it forgets how to stand tall. Jung understood that certain paths demand silence, solitude, and sacrifice, not of the self, but of the other. Because true individuation never negotiates. Truth cannot be shared with one who still fears their own shadow. Society, with its programmed smiles and high-definition weddings, does not forgive those who choose to walk alone. You are selfish. You will end up alone. Nobody is happy without a partner. These phrases arrive like inverted prayers, spoken more out of fear than wisdom. But what if they are wrong? What if fulfillment is not found in meeting the right person, but in becoming the person no one could ever replace? This is not against love. It is for choosing oneself, even if it means walking through deserts where few dare to step. We will unearth Jung's insights, illuminate the dark corridors of the mind, and reveal what most fear to even imagine. Remaining single can be the most radical form of freedom, and perhaps the only way to avoid self-betrayal. You grew up hearing you needed to find someone who would understand you, complete you, fill that void you couldn't name but felt every night before sleep. From an early age, culture imposed this idea. You will only be happy when you are with someone else. And if you are alone, something is wrong with you. The message is subtle, but relentless. Single people are seen as incomplete, suspicious, broken, as if solitude were a flaw, a personal failure. But what if it were the opposite? What if the need to love were just a disguised form of escape, a defense mechanism against the terror of facing your own soul, naked, raw, without distractions? Jung recognized something most still avoid seeing. Most do not love. They cling. They use the other as a shield against their own existence. That is the true illusion of romantic love, the belief that another person will save us from ourselves. You meet someone, you fall in love, you feel warmth, a sense of purpose, and then adaptation begins, small, almost invisible. At first, you change an opinion to avoid conflict. You silence a desire. You sacrifice a habit. You call it maturity. You call it partnership. But in reality, you are beginning to disappear. And one day, without realizing it, you wake up and no longer know who you are. Your essence has been replaced by a compliant character, someone living in fear of losing what they believe they cannot live without. Jung did not despise love. He despised surrender. The surrender of autonomy, of creation, of the necessary madness to become oneself. Romantic love as an ideal demands that you dissolve into the other, building an identity upon fusion and emotional dependence. And that fusion kills what is most valuable: creative chaos. A man can only truly be himself when he is alone. This truth is heavier than most can bear, because being alone requires courage, and being with someone is often just a beautiful way to avoid that confrontation. It is not about opposing relationships. It is about recognizing the psychological price many pay to maintain the illusion of completeness in a couple. Most couples you see live in an apparent peace, but look closer. There are concessions that cost pieces of the soul. There are silences hiding drowned desires. There are marriages that are not alliances, but pacts of emotional survival. Jung warned that such unions can become cages where the will to self-realization slowly withers, and romantic love, in practice, often becomes an emotional prison, signed with flowers and promises. Have you ever seen an artist create in the middle of constant noise? Have you tried to dive into your own thoughts while managing someone else's moods? The soul that expands needs space, but romantic love demands containment, adjustments, endless negotiations. What to eat, who to talk to, how much time to give to the other. An internal committee deciding whether your choices are compatible with the relationship's boundaries. It is exhausting. And behind all that negotiation hides a dangerous idea that you only have value if you belong to something greater, a couple. Jung saw this fantasy as perilous. He warned against projecting onto a partner everything we deny in ourselves. Your sensitivity, your intuition, your tenderness, everything is externalized, and thus you fragment yourself, mutilate yourself to fit, and you call it love. But true love does not demand that you vanish. It does not ask you to negotiate your essence, to dim your light so as not to outshine the other, to hide your pain for the sake of peace. The love Jung defended was something else. Amor fati, the love of one's destiny, one's path, of life as it is, absurdities included. And it begins the moment you stop seeking outside what you must find within. You do not need someone to complete you. You need courage to face yourself. Courage to walk alone when everything around you calls that failure. Because it is precisely in voluntary solitude that integrity is born, and from it, everything else. The search for wholeness in another weakens us, because it distracts us from our most sacred task, becoming whole on our own. Perhaps this is the question you most need to hear today. Do you truly want to love someone, or are you trying to avoid yourself? Now there is something you must know. Has it ever happened that just when you most need to stay calm, your mind collapses? That loss of control is not just emotional, it is mental. It happens because most were trained to feel before thinking, to react before observing. The problem is structural. No one taught us to train the mind as a muscle. That is why every small frustration becomes an explosion, and every challenge an inner defeat. But there is another way to operate, a structure rooted in neuroscience, applied philosophy, and silent mental techniques that reprogram the way you respond and place you back in command. Freedom has always had a price, and very few are willing to pay it. Being free sounds noble and inspiring, but when reality arrives, cold, silent, and without guarantees, most run back to the safety of the known. Carl Jung understood this as few could. He knew that to live in true freedom, one must renounce what the world values most: belonging, acceptance, and emotional comfort. Solitude is not a trend or an aesthetic. It is a psychic battlefield where the fragile collapse. The free individual must face the mirror without masks, without distractions, without excuses, and almost no one is willing to do that. Most prefer to live in emotional bubbles, surrounded by validation, distractions, and commitments that seem important, but serve only to fill the void with noise. For Jung, solitude was never a punishment, but a condition, the necessary ground to become something beyond the average, to stop being the domesticated, reactive, conformist man, and instead become the creator of one's own values. This individual is what he would call the individuated self, the one who has transcended the herd mentality. But no one becomes this by being surrounded by caresses and pats on the back. The freedom Jung spoke of demands leaving the herd, and leaving the herd is a rupture, a mourning. You lose friends, lovers, and the comfort that comes with predictability. But in exchange, you gain yourself. Jung lived this choice to its ultimate consequences. He was not solitary by accident, but by conviction. He immersed himself in his inner world, writing, walking, confronting his own thoughts to the very limits of sanity. His reflections reveal a man who knew pain, but chose to continue, for he understood that the pain of isolation was preferable to the mediocrity of adaptation. He saw the social world as a stage of masks, marriages, conventions, convenient friendships, all distractions to avoid facing the absurd and terrifying depths of existence. Jung wanted more. He sought to unearth what lay hidden beneath centuries of illusion, and for that, he needed silence. Solitude is that necessary silence. Without it, you repeat what you hear, react to what others expect. You live as a reflection, not as an authentic being. But there is a point most ignore. Solitude is not the same as suffering. True solitude is different from the bitter sensation of being left behind. It is not rejection. It is a choice. It is the sacred space where thought matures, where consciousness reorganizes, where inner chaos finds form, direction, and fire. Jung often reminded us that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And such darkness does not surface in romantic dinners or weekends at the mall. It reveals itself only when you are completely alone, without distractions, without promises, without someone to rescue you from your own feelings. There is where true philosophical thought is born, and at the same time where many surrender, because solitude demands an emotional structure the modern world does not teach. We live in a society that rewards constant connection, oversharing, and the exposure of intimacy. Never have we been so surrounded, yet never have we been so empty. Silence terrifies because it forces you to listen to what you have been avoiding for years. Jung did not believe everyone was ready for this. He saw the philosopher, the creator, the solitary artist as the exception, a deviation, a mutation. Most do not want freedom, they want direction, someone to tell them what to do, what to feel, who to love, how to live. Real freedom is unbearable for those unprepared. That is why, when you begin to distance yourself, people judge. They say you have changed, that you are strange, that you need someone. They do not understand that you are not seeking someone. You are seeking depth, truth, silence, and the sound of your own thoughts until they finally shout something worth following. Freedom demands renunciation. You renounce the emotional comfort of someone waiting for you. You renounce the shared life plan. You renounce automatic affection. But in that renunciation, something else is revealed. Power. You become dangerous, unpredictable, untamable. Nothing can be used against you. You do not depend. You do not bend. You do not need to belong. Jung too was called mad, misunderstood by many, rejected by some. But he remained faithful to his own path. He did not live to please. He lived to tear veils, to disturb the peace of those sleeping under inherited lies. Such a life does not fit into traditional molds, nor into relationships shaped by emotional contracts. Total freedom demands that you be willing to cross deserts without company, without a map, without the promise of salvation. That is why Jung did not romanticize solitude. He saw it as a tool, a weapon, a method of purification. You begin to understand who you really are when you no longer have anyone to please, when you do not need to explain your steps, justify your decisions, or measure your words to preserve another's balance. In that wild space, you discover a brutal truth. Freedom costs you everything that kept you comfortable, but that is the price of becoming whole, rather than a softened version of yourself. Marriage is sold as the ultimate fulfillment of adult life, a happy ending, the final conquest, the trophy-marking entry into the world of the complete. But behind the smiles in the photos and the romantic captions lies another truth, denser, rawer, and rarely spoken aloud. For many, marriage is not a celebration, but containment, the end of the journey of discovery, the closing of possibilities, the interruption of expansion. Jung saw this clearly. Traditional marriage demands predictability, feeding on repetition, habit, routine, and comfort. But the creative soul needs the opposite: chaos, silence, discomfort. Nothing grand is born in controlled soil. Stability may be excellent for building homes, but fatal for birthing ideas. Think of a man with a mission, a vision, an inner calling that gives him no rest. That man needs time, focus, and undivided energy. Now imagine that same man married, bound to daily demands, emotional obligations, and endless negotiations over trivialities. The invisible cost is high. Every decision must be approved, every step explained, every change negotiated, and the creative spark begins to fade, not abruptly, but slowly. Marriage turns existential urgency into shared schedules. It replaces restlessness with consensus, deep truth with the silent agreement not to disturb the peace. At that point, many men give themselves up, trading their vocation for domestic harmony, smiling while knowing that something essential was left behind. Jung would say, it is the will to self-realization that dies, the vital energy that drives creation, rupture, and transcendence, now domesticated by the desire to please. Traditional marriage demands a constant performance, being emotionally available, filtering what is said, what is felt, what is dreamed, becoming half of a project, half of a home, half of a story. But Jung did not believe in halves. He believed in wholeness, in the individual who chooses to be entire, even at the cost of losing the world's approval. For the one born to create, such renunciation is a sentence. Great ideas require solitude, mental space, and a mind undivided between creative attention and the worry over Saturday dinner plans. The golden cage is comfortable, beautiful, and safe, but it is still a cage. Those who dare to create something greater than themselves cannot live behind bars, even if they are decorated with affection. Jung knew this because he lived it. His writings were not born in cozy afternoons with a spouse by his side. They were born in solitary mountains, in silent days, in nights of fever and delirium. It was there, in isolation, that he produced ideas which still unsettle the world today. Now ask yourself, how many ideas have you abandoned to keep peace with someone? How many projects have you stored away because they did not fit the dynamics of a relationship? How many truths have you silenced to preserve comfort? Modern marriage, even when promising companionship, often demands shaping oneself into something manageable. And for a restless mind, that is the beginning of symbolic death. The price is high but silent. You don't feel it at once. It creeps in slowly when you avoid a subject, when you postpone a plan, when you choose silence over attention, and you call it love. But it is not love. It is fear. Fear of losing the little you have built. Fear of rejection. Fear of facing the world alone. Jung did not seek companions. He sought thinkers, individuals willing to lose themselves, deconstruct themselves, bleed intellectually until they discovered a new way of being. For that, one must be free. Free from the fear of disturbing others, free from the obligation to smooth one's edges, free from the need to always have someone beside you. Marriage, as it is structured today, suffocates that freedom. It is an emotional contract with invisible clauses, clauses that demand silence, accommodation, and the postponement of dreams in the name of stability. But who said stability is a virtue? Jung would provoke, what if instability is precisely what moves the soul? What if living intensely, even in solitude, is more honest than smiling beside someone who does not understand your depth? Here is where many retreat, preferring to adapt, to stay, to give themselves up. But some choose to walk away, the path without applause, the quiet room, the night walk with their own shadow. And in that choice, something is born. Not comfortable peace, but the wild integrity of one who needs no explanation. Marriage can be beautiful, but for certain individuals, it is too beautiful not to be dangerous. And when greatness is at stake, the beauty of the cage does not outweigh the price of freedom. The mind needs space to be dangerous, but almost no one talks about this. They speak of thinking outside the box, of creating, of innovating, but they don't say that such a process demands something few can bear: being alone. Solitude, when faced with awareness, turns the mind into a weapon, not of destruction, but of revelation. When you are alone, no one dictates the rhythm of your thought. There are no external expectations, no foreign emotions to consider, no demand to moderate the intensity of what you feel or conceive. It is you, your mind, and the abyss between what is and what could be. Jung understood this with almost brutal clarity. The absence of bonds was not a lack of love. It was a tactic, a method for purifying thought, a way to prevent ideas from becoming concessions. Relationships, no matter how affectionate, generate noise, interference, too many opinions, too many emotions. All that emotional density is a constant invitation to moderation, to softening, to self-editing. But radical thought, the kind that truly moves the world, does not arise in places where you must ask permission to exist. It is born in silence, in hours when no one watches, in moments when you owe no explanation. Living alone, the mind begins to breathe differently, expanding, testing absurd ideas, forging connections that would be censored if spoken aloud. It can be inappropriate, exaggerated, scandalous, and precisely there lies its power. Einstein did not formulate his theories around family tables. Tesla did not create the foundations of modern electricity while smoothing over marital disagreements. Camus did not face the absurd of existence, wondering if his partner approved. These men isolated themselves not out of arrogance, but necessity, for they knew that certain ideas require a protected psychic womb, an environment without noise, without emotional interference, without the constant surveillance of expectation. The liberated creative mind is unpredictable, unsettling, transgressive, and such activity rarely fits into ordinary relationships. Imagine interrupting a deep, intricate line of thought just to resolve a domestic misunderstanding. Calm and insecurity or explain why you didn't reply to a message. It seems minor, but it is corrosive. The mind loses its thread, the thought dissipates, the creative energy scatters, and the idea that was about to be born dies. Few notice how often that cycle repeats in marriages, courtships, and well-intentioned relationships. Carl Jung would call it a slow poison, the constant dilution of the will. And the most tragic part is that it feels normal. Most accept that intellectual mediocrity as the price of love, as part of the deal. But the solitary creator does not accept it. He chooses something else. He chooses to awaken when he wishes, to think until the mind burns, to write without a clock, to destroy what he created the day before, and start again, all without having to justify his madness to anyone. The absence of bonds in this context is fertility, space, fire that never dies because no one demands it be moderated. Of course, it has a cost. There will be no one waiting in the living room, no couples dinners or Sunday meals. You will be seen as strange, eccentric, cold. But in return, you gain something no one can give you: the freedom to think as far as your soul can go. Jung did not see this as a sacrifice, but as a mission, the task of thinking the unthinkable, feeling the unbearable, walking to the edge of the human and returning with something new. That task demands a free mind, and a free mind needs a life unbound by the need for external validation. It is not about hating love. It is about understanding that certain bonds, however beautiful they seem, suffocate the flame you most need to keep alive. You have already felt it. You have already had an idea you had to postpone because someone needed you in that moment. You have already interrupted intense writing because there was a pending conversation, a discomfort to resolve, an emotion to manage, and no one forced you. But you went, and in that moment, you lost something. You lost a piece of yourself. The solitary creator learns to protect that as a monk protects his temple, because he knows greatness is subtle. It does not shout, it does not insist. It appears in unexpected moments, and if you are not ready, it leaves. The free mind is wild. It needs to run alone, needs open fields, needs sleepless nights and slow mornings. It does not fit in shared schedules or in apartments built for two. It wants to overflow, to burn, to destroy and rebuild. And above all, it wants silence. Because only in silence does chaos find form. And only in solitude does thought become truth. There comes a moment when you must decide whose life is yours. Not in theory, but in practice. Because most claim to be free, but live as employees of others' expectations. They say they choose for themselves, yet every step is filtered through fear of judgment, rejection, and loneliness. Choosing yourself is more than an act of courage. It is an act of war, a silent declaration that you will no longer negotiate your integrity. Jung knew that such a choice comes with a price, because the moment you decide to make yourself the center of your existence, everything that orbited out of convenience begins to destabilize. People drift away, plans collapse, relationships break. But what remains is you, bare, free, and finally whole. Most do not want that kind of freedom. They want the edited version, the freedom with a manual, with guaranteed affection, with a comforting soundtrack. But real freedom is brutal, empty, dangerous. It does not come with applause. It comes with silence and with total responsibility for every choice. True sovereignty is not about ruling others. It is about not being ruled by anyone, not by culture, not by lack, not by fear. You know you are on that path when you stop asking whether people agree with your decisions, when you start living without asking permission, when you say no, and you feel no guilt when you choose to walk alone, even if everyone says you are wrong. That choice frightens and isolates, but it also liberates, because you begin to realize something no one told you. The life you truly want does not fit into the molds you were offered. And to live it, you will have to betray expectations, disappoint, and let down those who projected a version of you that never existed. This is where many give up. They return to lukewarm relationships, predictable jobs, plans that disturb no one. They call it peace, but deep down they know it is surrender. Jung would say, "Become who you are," but no one teaches you how, because to be who you truly are means letting go of the safety of being who others approve of. It means placing yourself at the center of your life without fearing being called selfish. Selfishness is not thinking of yourself. It is demanding that others think for you. The person who chooses themselves stops delegating, no longer blames others for their unhappiness. They do not wait to be saved. They do not need to be understood to keep moving forward. They are enough for themselves. And that scares people, because one who is enough for themselves does not bend. They do not need to please to belong. They do not need to agree to keep affection. They do not need to hide their intensity to fit in. That person is dangerous because they are free. And in a world built on emotional dependencies, a free person is a threat. Choosing yourself is like leaping from a cliff without knowing if there is ground below. And yet you leap, not from impulse, but from awareness, from knowing that staying where you are is dying in life, accepting emotional scraps in exchange for company, selling your soul for safety. And that is not life. It is survival disguised as routine. Jung never asked you to be happy. He asked you to be whole, even if that means losing everything that now gives you comfort. Because only when you lose everything that kept you safe do you discover who you truly are. Solitude at that level ceases to be absence. It becomes fertile ground, the space where your will grows, where your vision takes form, and where your existence finally finds its justification. The one who chooses themselves does not need to be understood. They need only be faithful to one thing, their own truth, even if it costs them the love of others, even if it turns the world against them. Because in the end, they know the greatest act of love is not to abandon oneself. So, you made it this far, and now you know what that means. It means that, at some level, you already knew that the life they sold you with rings, promises, and emotional stability is not for you. Maybe you tried, maybe you are still trying, but something inside remains restless, keeps whispering that there is something more, and there is. But that more is not in finding someone, it is in becoming someone. Someone who does not need approval to breathe, someone who can be alone without collapsing, someone who builds an existence not to be accepted, but to be true. Jung said that one who has a why can endure almost any how, but that why you only find when you silence the world around you. And that demands courage, detachment, losing the comforts that kept your soul asleep. The world is not interested in your freedom. It is interested in your adaptation. But there comes a point when adapting is the same as dying, only in slow motion. Now you have two options: return to normality and pretend this video never shook you, or take the risk. The risk of living as one who owes nothing to anyone, as one who carries in their chest the only loyalty that matters, the loyalty of never betraying oneself. I had to be alone for a long time to understand this. And it was not one of those functional singlenesses with lively nights and apps installed. It was not that kind of solitude. It was the kind that silences everything around you. I remember one night in particular. It was raining. I was sitting on the floor, leaning against the cold wall of my room, not out of drama, but exhaustion. And for the first time, I did not want anyone. I did not want someone to talk to, nor someone to come and save me. I wanted to listen to myself, to understand myself, to rebuild myself. And there, in that almost primitive state of presence, I realized I was whole. Hurt, but whole. Alone, but free. Afraid, but honest. And that was when everything began to make sense. If this video reached you in some way, it was not by chance. Life does not send this kind of message to those still asleep. It whispers it to those who have already begun to awaken. And that was when everything began to make sense. If this video reached you in some way, it was not by chance. Life does not send this kind of message to those still asleep. It whispers it to those who have already begun to awaken. If you felt these words resonate with you, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next step in your own journey of self-discovery. Because in the end, the greatest act of love is to never abandon yourself.